Hello, everyone. This is Dean Edwards, International Coordinating Editor for Democracy Watch News in Salem, Oregon. Welcoming you all to our newsroom and another episode of Democracycast, weekly news briefings. Going to go in a little bit different order today due to pressing circumstances. We're going to start with John Harvey in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, our Chief Information Officer, who gratefully, we are very grateful to him for setting up this call and managing this event. And he's going to be functioning as our Chief International Correspondent to give us his weekly technology report. Then we'll be going to Mark Taylor-Canfield, who will give us some information from the great city of Seattle, the Emerald City, and then back to me. So that's our schedule for today. We look forward to hearing the technology report and updates from Seattle, Washington. So John in Pittsburgh, I know you're pressed for time. What have you got for us today?
Thanks, Dean. So today we're going to continue on with the Facebook saga, or let me correct myself, the Meta saga. I just can't get used to that name after so many years. For those of you that don't know, Meta is the new name of the holding company, and Facebook is now just a product. But it's interesting to note that everyone's been talking about the metaverse and how Microsoft and Meta and others, including NVIDIA, have been making announcements about what they're going to be doing. Recently, however, both Microsoft and Facebook announced a joint venture, which I find very interesting. Facebook Work app is going to integrate with Microsoft Teams. And this is really what is needed for the so-called metaverse to come to fruition, is the ability to transverse the metaverse without having to go into one app and then another and close down an app and worry about where something is located. So, it's a very good first step in the right direction, in my opinion. Today, we're going to continue to talk a little bit more about the history of communications and how we got here and why none of this is surprising. The metaverse, for instance, didn't just come out of thin air. And we're going to go back to 1436, when Johannes Gutenberg is credited with inventing the printing press. And Gutenberg actually didn't really make any money out of it. He I believe, died before the actual fruition of his product came to light. And the first printing was 200 copies of the Bible, but that took 3 years. And so, as you can imagine, a lot of things happen in 3 years. The people that were aware of this didn't come flocking to the printing press place to buy the Bible. What made printed words possible was the fact that shortly after the printing press, people figured out that to make this effective, one needed to develop a way of distributing the word, getting the word across. And so one of the methods that they did or used was to print a couple of books or a run of books and then give them to various sea captains that were going off to America, for instance. And once there, they would also print off pamphlets and various other things that once there, a local printer could copy them and then distribute that. And that's really how we started seeing mass communication kick into gear, where finally people didn't have to take the priest's word for what was contained in the Bible. They could now read the Bible themselves. And that was very controversial, as you can imagine, during those times. But it goes to the fact that information needs to propagate, and it's up to people to move this information forward. So, what we have is this information arriving, say, in the New World, as I said, here in the United States. And not everyone could afford to buy these pamphlets. And so one of the ways that information was propagated as a result of the printed word again was that we had people, town criers, if you will, that read off the news. People are hungry for information. People are hungry for gossip. And I think, that's one of the reasons that fake news is so prevalent, is that it's entertaining, that people want to be taken out of their little worlds, and words do that. They have a way of taking us to another place, whether it's real or not. And that really is part of the problem that we're dealing with today. Hopefully people should have more common sense, or the ability to think critically and know when something is a parody, or know when something is not true, and make informed decisions. But the important thing here is getting the word out, and we continue to come up with technological innovations that really builds off these first inventions, where they were developed to help people communicate, to get people to realize that there is a wider world around them. And hopefully people still read, and people still look at great works like Aristotle, Plato, etc., and use them to come to an understanding of the world. So that's it for me today, and we'll see you next week. This is John Harvey from Pittsburgh. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And next, we're going to go to Seattle, Washington, the Emerald City. Jeff Santos likes to call him the Renaissance Man, because Mark does so many different things with so many talents. We're fortunate to have him with us, not only in the policy role as executive director, but also in his administrative capacity as vice president of our news service. And finally, not the very least, besides being a contributor to Democracy Watch News, Mark is also our editor for Press Freedom. So Mark, what have you got to report to us today?
Well, all around the world, as I've been reporting, there have been crackdowns on freedom of the press, including an Iranian photojournalist, Rahil Mousavi, was arrested on unspecific charges. That's breaking today from the Committee to Protect Journalists. Iranian authorities are being called upon by CPJ to immediately release the Arab Iranian photojournalist, to drop any charges against her, and to let her work freely. That's a quote from Committee to Protect Journalists today. And what happened on that story is that on November 9th, security forces with the intelligence ministry arrested Mousavi, a freelance journalist in the southwestern area of Iran. Authorities have not specified the reason for her arrest or disclosed any charges against her, according to these reports. It's also been reported by the US-based human rights activist news agency and the exile-run news website Iran Wire. So according to CPJ's Middle East and North Africa program coordinator, Sharif Mansour, Iranian authorities must release the photojournalist immediately and unconditionally, and let her do her job documenting the lives of Arab minorities in Iran. Journalists must be able to work without fear that they will be arbitrarily detained. She has an Instagram site where she has 5,300 followers. And if you want to find that site to try to support the situation, this is how you spell her name: R-A-H-I-L, Rahil, M-O-U-S-A-V-I. And so you can also go to cpj.org, the Committee to Protect Journalists, to find the latest on this. A source familiar with the case has told CPJ on the condition of anonymity that, citing fear of reprisal, she publishes most of her photos on social media such as Instagram, because local media outlets refuse to publish her content for fear that'll create problems for them with Iran's censors. So that's one of the breaking stories that you'll find today internationally. in terms of news about journalism. And I do want to give a shout out to the Committee to Protect Journalists, also Reporters Without Borders. In the United States, there's also the group Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. They've all been doing a really good job with their limited resources and trying to get these stories out to the world, because in many cases, the stories are not being told in their home countries. And so it's almost up to media and activists outside of the country to even get these stories out. Recently, there's also been a CPJ has also sent out an alert about the killing of a Yemeni journalist in a car bomb attack, and all parties to that conflict in Yemen have been accused of attacking members of the press. And so CPJ is speaking out against that and demanding that that situation be thoroughly investigated. That's Rasha Abdullah Al-Khazari, and the journalist was killed in a car bomb attack just recently. And he, Al-Khazari was pregnant at the time, and those reports, her husband, who is also a journalist, was seriously injured in the blast and has been hospitalized according to those reports. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, according to the Associated Press. However, Al-Harazi worked for the Emirati news channel, Al Ain and Al Sharq, according to the Associated Press and a report by the Saudi satellite news channel Al Arabiya. She worked as a journalist, a photographer and camera operator, and also for the UAE-based Bloomberg Ashgard collection of the US Business Newswire and Saudi government-tied Saudi Research and Media Group. So according to some people that are familiar with her work, they also spoke to CPJ on anonymity. And this is a situation where all over the country, CPJ has security issues in communicating with journalists and activists, human rights observers, to try to get these stories out without retribution in these countries. So it must be noted that there has been, in general, reported by the Committee to Protect Journalists and by Reporters Without Borders, a increase in attacks on the press and on journalists around the world. It's not just in any particular part of the world or any particular continent. This is happening worldwide. So if you want to find more information about that, you can go to the Reporters Without Borders website, and that's available at rsf.org. You have an ongoing count by Committee to Protect Journalists and Reporters Without Borders on the number of journalists who are currently in prison or have been killed. And according to Reporters Without Borders, as of November 11th, Veterans Day, formerly Armistice Day of 2021, 37 journalists have been killed worldwide. 1 citizen journalist was killed, and 4 media assistants have been killed. There's also, of course, journalists who have been imprisoned, and that's a whole other story that we can get into during my next report. But I think it's just important, especially for a North American audience, to realize that freedom of the press and issues regarding the security and safety of press around the world has really come to the forefront in many countries, and unfortunately is probably not getting the kind of reportage and coverage that it should in the United States. But it is an issue, and there were a lot of problems in the United States with reporters trying to enter the United States during the Trump administration, when border officials would confiscate cameras and things like that. So the United States currently is ranked 44th in the world in terms of press freedom. Reporters Without Borders will be coming out with a new study next year, and we can only hope that there will be an improvement in our ranking. The United States used to be ranked up there around 19 before the 2011 Occupy Wall Street protests, when police began harassing and arresting reporters at protests. And ever since then, and also since the Trump administration, especially, our ranking on the World Press Freedom Index, which you can find at the Reporters Without Borders website, has been steadily declining. We have improved 4 points over the last couple of years. It was down at 48 at one time, and then we rose up to 45th, and now we're at 44th. But if you look at the list of countries and regions on the Reporters Without Borders website and check out the World Press Freedom Index, you'll be very shocked, I think, if you live in North America, about the United States' ranking compared to other countries. And it's a very instructive exercise to look at the list and see what's going on, because I can tell you right now that we're at number 44. And if you go up the list, you'll find that there are other Western nations that are way ahead of us. Norway and Finland are usually, over the last few years, they have been number 1 and number 2, and that continues today. Sweden is number 3, Denmark is number 4, so the Scandinavian countries, but Costa Rica is number 5, actually, and Jamaica is 7th. So we have countries in other parts, other hemispheres, that are doing better than the United States. And Samoa is one of those places. They're number 21. Namibia is number 24 as compared to the United States, we being at 44th. So it's definitely something that I've been trying to get information out about, this ranking, this index that takes place every year. And Reporters Without Borders also gives background information on how they came to these, how they got these statistics, what their analysis is, in order to uncover countries that are violating press freedom. At the very bottom, you will find countries that have traditionally, especially recently, been very nasty for journalists, including countries like, of course, North Korea and China. Iran are way down, and North Korea is 179, China is 177, Saudi Arabia is 170, and Egypt is not much farther ahead. They're at 166. Russia, which has recently been designating journalists as foreign agents, is at 150. So the principle and both the infrastructure, the dynamics, and the acceptance of press freedom is not universal around the globe. There are many parts of the world where press freedom is not accepted as the norm. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield with Democracy Watch News, the editor for Press Freedom, and I'll continue to bring you more interesting statistics and reports from instances around the world where reporters and the freedom of the press are being challenged. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield from Seattle.
Thank you, Mark. This is Dean Edwards coming back to you from Salem, Oregon. I'm going to give a quick report on today's events at COP26 for the 11th of November of 2021. The conference ends tomorrow, our time, as of this recording. Of course, you'll be hearing this in the past tense, but this is a live recording, so you get to hear it as it comes in. What's happening today on the 11th, on Thursday, was that the Alliance of Small Island States, the cities, all had representative spokespeople there on the dais, speaking to the group, along with a couple of very interesting panels. The Secretary General spoke, a U.S. representative spoke. Also, the young activists from Africa were participating in fully in this conference. It was a stark contrast to previous iterations of the International Forum on the Climate Disaster. And that's the term that they're using now. Make no mistake about it, the world is in trouble. The clock is ticking. We're 8 minutes to midnight, add a tick every year to the end of this decade. That's pretty much my analogy for the rest of the decade, according to what I'm hearing. There were 4 major areas that were covered and activities going on, one of which is the Glasgow Business Alliance, which involves a lot of private industry and non-state actors around the world who are active in free enterprise and business. Another is the race for the cities. And the third one that they talked about was a race to zero. And those are all programs and activities you're going to be hearing more about. But there's a new issue that's been added to this, and there's been a lot of controversy over it, as countries such as Africa, which accounts for 3% of global emissions, is being saddled with huge consequences and damages, lost to culture, lost to historical sites, lost to coastline. The damages are difficult to assess. They're asking for compensation. They're asking for damages for this. And that is an issue you're going to be hearing more about how we deal with damages, how we deal with other factors relating to damages. They're asking for contributions, serious contributions from the international community, particularly those members who are responsible for bringing us to this point. So that was COP today. I want to shift my emphasis to being president of the news service for a moment to talk about why we exist and why we are reporting to you at all. It has come to our attention over this past decade that the United States in particular and the world in general is at a crisis of democracy. This is a moral moment for us. It's a cause for pause. And as journalists, we have a responsibility to meet that problem, to meet those problems, to deal with our responsibility for holding the public trust that gives us special privileges on the world scene and nationally. So Democracy Watch will be here. We will continue to report on events and people and activities that are significant for building and sustaining healthy democracies around the world and the issues that relate to that. That's my quick summary for you. I want to thank you for joining us here at Democracy Watch News for another issue of Democracycast, our weekly news briefings. And I might add one final thing. Keep an eye on Sudan. Last week, we did an extended report on what's going on in Sudan on the 13th of this month. Take a look at what happened on the 13th or will happen on the 13th. There'll be a nationwide effort there. Last time, there were 5 million people out in the streets. I would not be surprised from what I'm hearing to see that exceeded. So keep an eye on the Sudan, keep an eye on Swaziland. Elections in the Gambia coming up. We'll have more for you in upcoming episodes. This is Dean Edwards, International Coordinating Editor for Democracy Watch News, signing off from Salem, Oregon, inviting you to join us again next week.